Hi guys, how is it going everyone? I welcome you all to today's episode on our Python series. In today's video, we will be learning while loop as a furtherance to our last session on for loop. In the last session, I took my time to explain why we need for loop. So today we understand when we also need to use while loop. Unlike for loop, which is predefined. So as being stressed, being a definite loop. So a loop which will understand how many times we want it to iterate beforehand. So while loop works differently. So while loop keeps iterating until certain conditions are met. Again, so before we use while loop, we don't have an idea of how many times we want an iteration to occur. So we don't have like a glimpse of how many times we want a specific body of our code of our program to repeat itself. So this is one of the reasons why we would consider while loop. So while loop is also known as indefinite loop, right? So it's also known as indefinite loop. So it's a loop whereby it keeps iterating until certain conditions are met. So there is no guarantee ahead of time regarding how many times the loop will go around. So we don't know. So until a condition is met. So it is also, this is why it is also popularly known as a conditional loop. So it is either referred to as a conditional loop or an indefinite loop. So it works with condition, right? So we can't say beforehand when it stops or when it breaks in a program until a certain condition is met. So how this condition is defined, we would be understanding and appreciating that in a second. So in Python, an indefinite loop is implemented using a while statement. So there's a key word we use while we want to use an indefinite loop. So which is popularly known as the what? The while statement. So we'll be saying this now in a second. So let's check this very quickly. So syntactically, this is how we define our while loop. So you can say while, right? Then define a condition. So it's as simple as this. So saying while, right? So which is our key variable of iteration, then the condition. So in this case, we can say the condition can be anything, right? So we'll learn how to define the condition in a second. So I'm just trying to give us the syntax. So this would be the condition, right? So when we say this is the condition, then we add a colon, then enter. So enter would now be the body of the program. That is our scripts that we want the program to execute for us, right? So you can just state it here to be the what? To be the body. So it is as simple as this. So with this, we've been able to define a condition to execute depending on what we define as the body of the what? Of the while loop statement. So a very basic example that would make this to stick and make sense very quickly is using while loop to um, output a number from 0 to 10. Again, so we want to use a while loop to output or to print out numbers from 0 to 10. So as I have stated earlier, that when we want to define a loop using condition, so while loop is a what? A very good approach we need to adopt. So in this case, so our condition could be, as you would have guessed, right, to say that before we use the while loop, so one of the convention or the syntax in this case is to first define our what? Our variable. So our variable that would be counting the numbers, right? So this would just be like a counting variable so that the while loop or the while condition would understand that, fine, we want to print 10 numbers, right? Between 0 and 10. So how do I know that I have reached the what? The threshold defined in the loop what condition. So in this case, we can say what count. This can be anything, right? It's a what? It's a variable. So you can call it count, you can call it I, you can call it anything. So since we are starting from 0, so we set this count to what? To 0, right? So this will count for us. So while in the body of the condition, while in the body of the loop, so as it is being printed, as the body is being executed, so it's also what change the count what value. So we are going to appreciate this in a second. So then we can now define our what? Our while loop condition. So in this case, we want it to print 0 to what? 10. Then our condition could be while counts, right, is less than or equal to 10, right? So we say while counts is less than or equal to 10. So what should happen? So this is the body as defined in our words, in our syntax earlier. So we want it to print what? Counts. So now let me explain what is happening in the background here. So what we are stating here is we set, so this is called initialization. So in this case, this count is the initialization variable. So it's initialized 0. It's initialized the numbers we are trying to what print out, right? So the first iteration that count would do, so count would first check is 0, which is the value, right? The value we initialized it with is 0 less than or equal to 10. Provided this condition is true, it's what? It keeps the iteration going until the condition becomes false. Once the condition becomes false, it breaks the loop, right? It breaks out of the loop. And what can make the condition to be false is what we have defined here. Once the value of counts is now equal to 10 or more than 10, the condition is what? False in this regard. Then it breaks out of the what? Out of the loop, right? So then another thing we also need to observe while using a while loop in this scope is to what? To also use our what? Our counts variable, right? So we need to what? Increase our, we call it what? The increments. So we also need to increment count. So why we need to increment count would make sense in a what? In a second. So we can say here that count should now be equal to what? So we increase count by what? By 1. So we say counts is equal to count plus 1, right? So I am going to use a flow chart to visualize what is going on in the back end so that we can understand why we need to use this count, right? So and we can also appreciate what would be the results if we would leave out this count while defining our what body of our while loop condition. So now let's see what we have here when we print it out. So as you can see it here, right? So we have numbers from 0 to 10 printed out on the screen, right? Now, so let's check what is happening in the back end. So for instance, let's say this is our words. This is the condition, right? So this is our condition. So if this is the condition, so you can say this is the condition, right? And this is the what? The body. This is the body of the what? Of the loop. So you can say this is the body. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, provided this condition is true, it executes the body. And in this case, we have stated that the body should print counts. As you can see it clearly here, the body should what? Print counts, right? While the condition should be what? Provided it is less than or equal to 10, you should what? Ensure you print counts. Now, when we check here, and then don't forget we initialize our count to be what? to be 0. So condition checks is counts less than or equal to 10. Yeah, 0 is what? 0 being the value of count is less than 10. Then, which means this is what? True. It is a what? It's a yes. It's like a Boolean expectation. So it is a yes. Then it executes the body by printing out what? By printing out counts. So in this case, the first iteration checks is 0 less than 10. Yes, 0 is less than 10. It prints out what? 0. So that is why we have our what? First 0 printed on the screen. Now, why do we need to also use the increments? We also need increments because if we leave out increments, would have what we know as the what? Um, we would have what we know as what? Infinite loop. We are going to have infinite loop. How are we going to have infinite loop? We are going to have infinite loop because every time this condition checks what the value of count is, count would always amount or be equal to 0, and it would keep on printing 0 for us because count would not increase. And once count does not increase, this condition would always be what? Be true. So what do I mean? So this is an example. So let's say, for instance, we've initialized with 0, right? So it checks the condition. Is 0 less than 10, right? Yes, 0 is less than 10. The body states to what? To print count. So it prints 0. So it will go back to the condition again because the condition is what? True. Checks again. Is 0 less than 10? Is 0 is still less than 10. It executes the body, prints out 0 again. It repeats the same thing again. Check. Is 0 less than 10? Is 0 is less than 10. It's what? Also execute the body of the while loop again, print out what? 0. So it keeps doing this infinitely until we what? Put a stop in the program. So this does not stop. It does not break out of the loop because we've left out our what? Increment variable, right? So now let's have an experience of what this is. So I'm going to comment out this count increment. So, and I would run the program. So let's see what we have as our output. So if you can see here, we have what? 0 being printed out continuously, endlessly. So this is an infinite loop. So you want to be very careful not to leave out or not to omit the increment while defining your what? Your while loop, or while using an indefinite loop in the case of what? While loop. So what do you do? So what if unknowingly or unconsciously you make this mistake? What do you do? So to stop this, right? So you just simply press on your keyboard Control C, right? So once I press Control C on my keyboard, it stops the what? The loop. It stops the iteration and bring back the what? The prompt, right? So it is very important to what? Increment after the body of the what? Of the loop. So again, I'm going to run this again to see what we have on the screen after returning the increment. So as you can see, we still have what? Print 0 from 0 to what? 10 again on the screen, right? So again, we checked how to use while loop, right? And also want to understand the flow and how everything is going on in the background. So we said we need to define a condition and also have a body what? Being met. So provided the body of the condition is met, right? Provided a condition is met, it's what executes the body. So how do we have 0 to 10 printed on the screen? So we check the condition, which is what? 0. So we stated here that while count is less than or equal to. So let's use a very small number here so that I can demonstrate this using the word flow chart. So now we have 0 to 3 printed, right? So what is happening in the back end? So we can say here that, so let's say uh, the condition, when it first checks, is 0 less than 3? Yes, 0 is less than 3. You should do what? Print 0. It's printed out 0. Then the next condition states that what? You should increase 0 by 1. That is, count should be what? Count plus 1. So when we say 0 plus 1, 0 is now what? So 0 plus 1 is 1, right? So the value of this count changes to 1. Then the while loop will now check again. The while loop checks again. Is 1 less than 3? 1 less than 3. So this is yes. It executes the body again, right? And print out, we printed out 0, right? So we print out 1. Then we also what? Execute the second instruction in the body, which is what? To also increment count by 1. So now 1 is what? Count is 1. Then we say what? 1 plus 1 again. Then count is 2. It comes again and check the condition. Is 2 less than 3? Yes. Do what? Print 2. So it comes here, print out 2. So we have 0, 1, 2, right? Then the other condition, the other instruction in the body is to what? To increment count by 1. Then we say 2 plus 1. Then we have what? 3 as the what? As count. So it checks again. Is 3 less than 3? 3 is not less than 3, but we have two conditions here, don't forget. So we stated that either it is less than 3 or equal to 3. However, the condition is still met because 3 is still equal to 3. So we now say what? Okay, print out 3 again. So that is why we also have 3 printed out on the screen. Then it's go ahead to check the next instruction, which is to also increment 3 by 1. Then it adds 1 to 3. We have 3 plus 1 here, so we have 4. Then it goes back to check the condition. Is 4 less than 3? Nope. Is 4 equal to 3? Nope. So now the condition is now what? False. And when a condition is false, it does what? It just breaks out of the loop. So now the answer is what? No. It breaks out of the loop, right? Then it prints out. That is why we have what's printed on the screen, 0 to what? 3. So this is basically how to use what? While loop. So to print out a number meeting a specific condition. So using a while loop for basically like this, it's not the only approach to make use of while loop, right? So there are also complex way that we can use while loop in order to achieve a specific objective, right, in the course of our program. So I know I will be checking is so one of the other common pattern, one or other common loop patterns, right? So using while loop interactively, right? And also using something that we know as a what? Sentinel. So we are also going to be checking these two examples to understand and appreciate how to use while loop, right? While writing our programs. So the next one we'll be checking now is how to use while loop interactively. So interactive in the sense that we want an output, right? We want to interact, engage the end user until a condition becomes false, right? So you always want them to enter something and ask them if they still have more things to enter until they now state that, okay, fine, I am fine. I am not entering any value anymore, right? So they want to what? Break out of the loop. So how can we do this? So in this case, we'll be writing a program that we can use to compute an average of a result, right? So we want to compute a result average. So and to do this, we all know that we can collect and collate series of numbers, right? So and divide that number by the number of what? By the number of the entries we receive. So in this case, let's say we have 5 numbers. You want to check the average of 5 numbers, right? So we need to enter these 5 numbers, add them together, and divide them by 5. So it gives us an average of those 5 numbers we have entered. So how can we use while loop, right, to achieve this? So we can just use this to understand how to use while loop interactively. So in this case, we can say that we want to define our total to be what? So we declare the total number to 0, right? So let's say the total is 0. So don't worry about all of this now. It would all make sense in a second. Then we say our count should also be what? Equal to 0. Then, so this is what the user would engage with, right? So let's say, do you have more? So we are going to ask if there is still more. So this more is where we want to collect response from the user. So if they say yes, it means the condition is met. Keep prompting them to enter more number until they say what? No, then break out of the loop. But provided they what? Select or enter yes, keep prompting them to enter more numbers, right? So we want to break out or we want to terminate this loop until they say what? No. So we can say what? More is also equal to yes. Now, it's where we define our condition, right? So don't forget we've defined more towards yes. Then our condition would be while more is what? Equal to, while more is equal to what? Yes, right? While more is equal to yes. Then we want to ask user to enter a number. So in this case, so we want to typecast this number into a what? Into a float. And don't forget, we would also be needing the what? The input to collect data or to allow users to what? Enter the number. So you can say here, enter a what? Number. So when we say enter a number here, right? So what happened next? Then the total variable we defined earlier, because this is where we'll be needing it, right? So what we are stating here is, okay, fine. This is the variable we will be using to sum all the number entered by the user. In this case, X is collecting data from user. So it's allowing user to what? Enter a number. So once they enter the number, then we collect all the number and store it, then add them up inside the total what? Variable. That is why we now say the total, which we have declined, which we defined rather earlier, to be what? To be equal to 0. Now we want to what? Make it to calculate all the numbers entered by the what? By our what? Users. So we say total plus what? Plus X, right? Don't forget the initial value of total is 0. So we had to leave it as 0 because 0 has no what? Value. So then anything we enter afterward should be what? Added together. Then after this, we'll now also call on our count. So don't forget, this count would be responsible for checking, right? The numbers, the overall number we have collected. So in this case, so when the user enters in the first prompt, right? The user enters 5. So which means 5, count would keep it. Okay, we have 1. In the next prompt, the user enters 10. So count keeps it again. Okay, fine. We now have 2. In the next prompt, user enter 15 or 20. Count will keep it again. We now have 3. So count will be keeping. Then we would use counts as our words to now find our average after we've added all the numbers together. All right. So then this is why we also now need to what? Increase count by what? By 1. Then we say count should be equal to what? Count plus 1. All right. Then don't forget, this is where we will now define our what? Our variable, right? We want to change the value of our more variable. So this is where we want to check, should we still keep the value of our more variable to yes or no? This is where the user now make their decision. Then we say here that more should be what? Equal to, so we use input to collect the data. Then we ask, do you have do you have more number, right? So do you have more numbers? So you want them to answer yes or no, right? So we can say here that, do you have more number? So if the answer is yes, right? So we keep prompting them until they say what? They say no. Then we can say here that our result should now be equal to total, right, divided by counts, right? So then we want to print what the average is of all our entries we've collected as a what? As a number. So we'll be using F string here. So you can now say here that what the average of the numbers is what? Then don't forget, we now what? Reference or return results here. So which is calculating the average for us. Now, this is what we need to do basically, right? So essentially, this program would teach us how we can also use while loop, right? So as we have stated, in this case, we don't know how many times a user wants to what? Add a number, right? So since we don't have an idea, we can't use for loop in this instance. So we need to use like a conditional loop, right? Or an indefinite loop, right? So it keeps prompting until the condition becomes false. In this case, the condition is yes, provided a user enters a number and says he or she has more number to enter, right? In this case, reply or responded with what? Yes. It keeps what? Prompting them. So now I am going to run this program now so that we can have an idea of how it works. So let me try and close this so that we can have a clear screen. Okay, so I have run it. Then we have it here. So stating that I should what? Enter a number. So in this case, I would say 5, right? So the next prompt is what? Do you have more numbers? So I would say what? Yes. Because I was entered yes, I receive another prompt, a further prompt. Enter a number. I would say 10. Do you have more number? Yes. Enter a number. Okay, fine. In this case, okay, I would also say 15. Do you have more number? Yes. Enter a number, 20. Do you have more number? Yes. So if you notice, provided the condition we've defined, right, while writing our program, set to yes, it means we are still what? Observing the condition. The condition is still true. So it keeps on prompting, prompting, prompting until we give it until the condition becomes what? False. So now let's now test what happens when we enter something different from yes. So let me enter the next number. I will say 40, right? Then when it asks me, do I have more number? In this case, I don't have any number, right? So I am done with all the results I want to compute. So I just want to compute, I want to find the average of 5, 10, 15, 20, and what? 40. So I have entered all the numbers I have. Then I want to break out of the loop. Then I say what? No. So as you can see it here, the next thing we got on the screen is what? The average of the numbers is what? 18. So if you also do the calculation, right? We say 5 plus 10 plus 15 plus 20 plus 40, right? So then you divide it by the what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 5. So it gives you what? 18, right? So this is a common pattern of using a what? A while loop. So the next example we would also be checking is also another common pattern whereby we can also use our what? While loop. And this is popularly known as what? The Sentinel, right? So we call this Sentinel loop. So Sentinel loop works in a case whereby we process a data until reaching a special value that signifies the end. So how do I mean? So in this case, we would receive a value, right? So when we receive a value, like a data, right? When we receive that data, we would now check with our condition. Is this data we receive the same thing as what we have here? If it is the same, then it breaks out of the what? Of the loop. If it is not the same, it keeps looping or iterating repeatedly until the what condition is satisfied. So one of the use cases for Sentinel loop is when we want to check for password, right? While we are interacting with a what with a software, right? So let's say, for example, we require or ask a user to enter a password, right? So the password, while registering or while signing up, has been stored in a database, right? So now let's now say in this instance, we already have a password stored in a database. So the next time the user wants to access that resources or the service, right? So he needs to also what, enter the password to verify the ownership of that resource or service he or she is trying to access, right? Then in this case, we give the user an option to enter the password. Until the password matches with what we have stored in our database, don't allow or don't sign in the user. So this is an example of what, of a Sentinel loop. So how can we turn this into a program? So we are going to be doing that in a sec. So that is not really far-fetched at all. So what we just need to do is to what, to begin with what, our Sentinel, right? So Sentinel is that word, the word we want to check our condition with. So we call it what, Sentinel, right? So in this case, I would say my Sentinel is what, password, right? Then I want to say, so let's assume this password is our table, right? That will store the record of a user's password. So I'll call this my password, right? So I call this my password. So we have defined a sentinel. After defining a sentinel, another convention is now to first collect a data, then compare and contrast that data we collected, right, with what we have stored in the what, in the database. So in this case, we can now say check. We want to use check to collect the data, right? So this is what a return of a user on our website, right? So we now want to check maybe the password they want to enter is the same as what we have in our database or not. So we can say what, so we use our input, right? In this case, we say enter your password, right? So we want to ask a user to enter their password. Then we can define our condition. Now, we can now define our condition. So how do we define our condition? It's very easy. We can say, wow, what, check is not equal to what? To password, right? While check is not equal to what? Password. So what should happen? Print incorrect password, right? So after printing incorrect password, what should happen next? Should you break out of the loop? Nope. You don't need to break out of the loop. We need to now repeat that check again in the loop, right? So which means this would now be responsible for reiterating the user until the correct password is provided. If the correct password is not provided, it keeps looping. It keeps looping, and this is what, an indefinite loop in what, action. So we repeat here and say what, check should be what again, should now be input again, right? So we ask enter your password again. So simply the same thing we've defined while what, declaring our sentinel. So enter your password, right? So essentially, until we receive the value, which is my password, as what? As a data for this password variable, it should keep prompting the user for a what? For a password. So now what happens when we now receive the correct password, right, from a user? Then we want to break out of the loop and say correct password, right? So we want to break out of the loop and say correct password. So I'll go over this program again so that it can click. So what we are doing basically is for every sentinel, the first thing you need to do is to define or declare your sentinel. And that sentinel is what? The value or the record you want to match with your condition, right? So until that condition is met, it keeps what? Iterating. It keeps what? Looping. So in this case, our sentinel is what? Password, right? Then we say the password is what? My password, right? So until it is my password, right? Until it matches with my password, keep asking, okay, tell this user that, okay, this is incorrect, then try again, right? This is incorrect, then let's make it more engaging, right? So we can say here that incorrect password, try again. So can you see? So incorrect password, try again. Incorrect password, try again, right? So now we now define our what? Our check. This check will be responsible to now compare what we are receiving with what we have stored in our database, right? So, and it is very important while using a Sentinel loop. So you need to define this also beforehand while using a what? A Sentinel loop. So then we proceed to our what? Condition. Then using the while, then check. While check, while check, what is check here? Anything we receive as input from the user at the instance of the what? Of the execution, right? So anything we receive as entry from the user at the instance of the execution should be compared with the password, the data, the value we have stored in the password variable, which is my password. If it matches, it breaks out of the loop instantly. So even if the first attempt, right, is equal to false, it breaks and end the what? The loop. So, but if it is true, if our conditions are still met, or if our condition is met, it's what keeps looping. It's loop endlessly until we meet that condition. So we've stated our condition to be while check is not equal to password, then print and tell the what? The user that incorrect password, try again. Then we want to keep looping, want to keep looping, want to keep what? Engaging the user to give us the password until it is what? Correct. Then what if we now receive the correct password? We want to say what? Correct password and break out of the loop. So we will be checking how this works now in a moment by interacting with it. So I'll be running the program now. So let's run this and see if we if we achieve our intention or otherwise. So okay, fine. We have a prompt requiring us to enter our password. So I would provide incorrect password for a number of time and see if we keep getting the prompt to enter the password or it breaks out of the loop even without giving the correct password. So here I would just say pass, right? Which is not our what's expected um, record. So can you see what we have here? We have incorrect password, try again. So I'll still enter a wrong password. So I'll say what? We still get another prompt, incorrect password, try again. Okay, let me say password, right? Incorrect password, try again. Okay, so I also want to say um pass, then word my. So I'll run it again. We still get what? Incorrect password, try again. So now let's now enter the what? The correct password, which is my password in our case. So we can say my password, right? Then enter. So can you see what happened? It broke out of the loop. Once it receives the correct password, which is what my password, and we get a printout stating that the password is correct. So this, amongst others, are the what common pattern where we can use our while loop. So again, just for a quick recap, so in today's session or video, so we are reviewing while loop, so understanding the rationale and logic of while loop, because essentially, if we don't understand the logic, we would confuse it as to when to use while and when to use for. So understanding the logic is very important and very what necessary. So that is why we need to appreciate or connect while loop with anything indefinite or anything conditional, right? So in this case, we checked a first example by using while loop, defining a condition to print numbers, right? To print numbers until the condition is what met. So in this case, we checked while loop with 3, right? So provided the number is less than and equal to 3, just print it for us, right? Then we also ensure that we used our what increment variable. So then we move from there and proceeded to also learn how to use while loop interactively, right? So let's assume we want to find an average of a numbers or average of numbers in our case. So we want to keep prompting, right, until we get a false of the condition. The condition is what? Yes. So when we get anything different from yes, we want to break out of that loop, right? So what makes this interactive? The interactive sense of this program is the fact that every time a user enters a number, right? So we still give them the opportunity, right, to know if they still have more number to what to add or to include in the what in the list of numbers we are trying to average. So that is why we also now use the what the option to ask them, do you have more numbers? So if the answer is yes, we prompt them to enter the number again, right? Then if the answer is no, we break out of the what of the loop and perform the operation. So by summing up all the number we receive and dividing it by the total of numbers entered by the what by the user. So then we didn't stop at that. We also proceeded and what check how to also understand and how to use a sentinel loop. So as I mentioned or as I emphasized, sentinel loop is just like defining a variable or a record, right, at the onset of our program. So we now want to check this record if it matches with what we want to receive from the end user. So if it matches, it breaks out of the loop instantly. It doesn't matter if it is the first attempt, right? It doesn't matter if it's the first attempt. So once it is correct, it breaks out of the loop. But if the condition is not met, right? If we don't still receive the required entry from the user, it keeps what looping. It keeps looping until it is being what satisfied. So, and as we have seen it in play in our password program. So we have our Sentinel as my password. Then we also define an input to receive an entry from the what from the end user, right? So once this password is being entered, so provided it is equivalent or the same thing as what we have as my password, right? So break out of the loop. If otherwise, notify the user that this password entered is incorrect, then you can try again. Then we keep what looping. So this is what an instance of a sentinel loop. So these are just basic and major use cases for a what for a while loop. So this will be the end of this video. So thank you all for watching to the end of the video. So if you found value in this, so don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also share it with others that you feel would also benefit from the video. So until next time, which would be our next video would be on nested loop. So you also understand nested loop. So just to whet your appetite, right? So just to give you a sneak peek into what nested loop are. So nested loop is just basically a loop inside another loop. So we also appreciate when we need to use a nested loop, why we also need nested loop, the logic, right? Understanding the fundamental and the basic of nested loop. Then we can become very comfortable using what nested loop. So until next time, do enjoy the rest of your day and bye for now. Cheers.